My weekly show in which I discuss role playing games and the associated tactical shenanigans with them. In essence, this is an opportunity to apply good, sound, small unit tactics to the tabletop role playing game environment. What I like to call the counter monster domain. So I originally had planned on doing the final episode in our 3 episode sequence on the ambush, exciting as that is. But last night, my Age of Worms campaign, of which I've been the dungeon master for, oh gosh, the past year and a half, we've been running that, had a hugely exciting gladiatorial event in which the players showed some really great tactics, and I wanted to actually break that down for you guys tonight. So we'll start by setting the stage. The players have enrolled, volunteered to take part in a huge gladiatorial competition. And this is, for those who are familiar, this is part of the mid 2000s Age of Worms adventure path, published in Dungeon Magazine. It's a D&D 3.5 adventure, 12 module sequence. They are on module or scenario 5, I believe, is this one, the Champion's Belt. And in this, they're in essence gone almost undercover. They've been sponsored to take part in these games in order to help investigate the man who runs them, a guy named Loris Rakinian, who's tied to the big bad evil guys. That's a little outside the scope of this discussion. But for their first match, they are going to take part in a 4-way battle royale, themselves and 3 other teams. Now, some of the guidelines. I put a 4-person on the battlefield limit on the party. And the reason why I did that was because, generally speaking, the largest team they will ever fight will also only have 4 members in the arena. And I didn't want the players to have too much of an undue advantage and make it too easy. 2, it ensured that they have a bench, and that it would force them to really think through how they want to approach the problem, rather than just throwing people at it. So the player characters are down here. Let me zoom in on this a little bit, show you what we've got for the PCs. Rogie Bloody Thumb, who is a Dwarven Ranger. Stavros, who is a half-elf fighter / arcane archer. Halflet Moon, who's a half-elf ranger. And Mateo Vidar, who is a human paladin. Up here, we've got Nod Diamondback, a kobold cleric, Toradal, a human warlock, and Bernard DeBard, our resident bard. And they are up here observing because they weren't part of the 4 in the arena. The 3 other teams that were taking part. Over here we have the Arcane Aruga, which is a team of 4 arcane archers. Even though, if I recall correctly, their leader, Renita, is the actual arcane archer, and the others are relatives of hers who are just fighters with really good archery skills. Over here we've got Koresh, who's a Jain outsider, who is partaking in these games in the Prime Material plane. He and his 2 mercenaries, they all fight mounted, and together they form the Sapphire Squad. Notice there's only 3 of them, but they're fighting mounted. And over here, the 4th team, we've got Jorin of the Badlands Revenge and his Knoll Halberdiers. Jorin is a high-level druid and with wild shape. Now, I wish he'd gotten a chance to wild shape, but he got knocked out of the fight too early. Whoops. So, 4 different teams on the battlefield. Now, what that meant from the player's perspective was they were really expecting me to assault them from all sides with every other team before the teams would fight each other. And I had already made up my mind long before then. No, the opposing teams would attack based upon what makes sense to them at the time. They would choose their targets based on that. So unfortunately, I deleted the order of initiative. But let me talk about the buffs real quick first. Before the match begins, each team was allowed to drink as many potions or have as many spells cast upon them to provide any advantages as they wanted. Other limits are nobody could fly more than 40 feet in altitude above the surface of above the floor of the arena, and surrender was an option. If you got, and I had in my notes, and I should actually let me grab this and point it out. I should have had these in my hand earlier. For each one of the team leaders for the other teams, I made what I call decision support templates. Now, those of you who are, you can't really see these very clearly. I'll put one up on the Twitter feed after this. So, for those who are familiar with U.S. Army doctrine, we often make what's called a decision support template, which is a series of information-driven decisions that a commander is going to need to make on the battlefield. And the decision support template assists the commander in that because it'll track the information feed he requires. It'll track the decision he needs to make. It'll give the commander, something that shows in the timeline of events on when he's expecting to make that decision. It'll tie back to the PIRs, the collection plan. And anybody who's followed me on Twitter for a while on my main account knows that I'm really big on decision support by priority intelligence requirements. It was something I worked in extensively when I was on active duty. So anyway, I had a decision support template set up for each one of the leaders of each other group, and it outlined what their pre-combat actions were going to take, and what their battlefield decisions were going to be. For instance, for this one on Joren of Badlands Revenge, I noted that before the fight would begin, he'd use Wand of Bull Strength on himself and his animal companion, that he would cast Speak with Animals, Barkskin, Bear's Endurance, Cat's Grace, and Longstrider on himself, and then Greater Magic Fang on his animal companion, which I actually kind of tweaked a little bit, and I used the animal companion as somebody who was brought into the fight via spell later on. And then I outlined what his tactics would be, that he would primarily hang back and let the Knoll Halberdiers engage, and that he would use Produce Flame. Now, unfortunately, that didn't work out very well for him. The intent was if he actually got engaged in hand-to-hand combat, that he would wild shape into a big-ass crocodile and then start chomping. Karush of a Sapphire Squad. The Mercs were going to do ride-by attacks, and Koresh was going to engage what he determined to be the center of gravity of the opposing team himself. He had the capability of shrinking an opponent down for 2 rounds. I chose not to use that because it just, from a tactical perspective, what was going on, it just didn't make sense. His main pre-combat action was to use Speak with Animals because, they're mounted, so that way he could talk directly to the horse and bypass the riders. And he would surrender at 5 hit points. For Arcane Aruga and Renita, their chief, she would consume a potion of Cat's Grace, and she would cast Jump on herself. In round 1, she would identify who she determined to be her toughest foe and cast Ray of Enfeeblement. Round 2, she would use Melf's Acid Arrow. And then she would begin identifying who she thought of as the most powerful spellcaster or on the field and cast True Strike. I noted that she would focus her efforts on Badlands Revenge originally, but that didn't work out that way just because of the way I dropped them on the battle space. And of course, our players are down here. I've already identified them. So I pretty much randomly put these folks into the arena. I randomized the decision about where they went, and that actually ended up driving everything. So, Karush and his folks are the first to go. They're mounted. These guys were originally, the Arcane Aruga was facing inwards. Oops. They were facing inwards, and Koresh looked at that and said, oh, well, flank attack. So Karush took his buddies here and attacked into Arcane Aruga's flank. Now, a flank attack automatically gives you a +1. They're charging. They're horse mounted. And they kind of tore this group up pretty quickly. So Arcane Aruga quickly became not a factor. Now, one of the advantages that our heroes, our player characters, made sure they had was, for starters, they cast a series of resistance spells on themselves. I want to see protection from energy, fire, and invisibility 10-foot radius. So when the fight began, these guys were actually invisible. Who's going to target them? Bernard the Bard started laying down that funky bass line with a tune of motivation for these guys. I did penalize them a little bit because the crowd is like 18,000 strong. And I'm like, can they really hear Bernard the Bard even if he's right above where they are? And so the next up, it was... I'm trying to remember the exact order of battle. Unfortunately, I deleted the order of battle, the turn order before we started this. So I'm trying to break this down by memory. So what happened was these guys were all kind of clustered together, and they're invisible at the beginning. But once it becomes their turn in the initiative order, they start shooting at the Badlands Revenge guys. The Badlands Revenge guys react badly and start chugging down towards them, trying to clear the distance on foot. Now, they are moving 30 feet around, which is a long time to take to cover that. They were up here originally. They were right at longbow range once the fight kicked off. Let me... give you an idea. Yeah, they were right about longbow range, about 120 feet when the fight kicked off. So, oops. So they come doing the chugga choo choo, and Joran is letting the Gnolls get ahead of him because he's gonna. The intent is for him to be behind them, let the Gnolls engage, and then he's gonna use spells. Until he needs to wild shape. So these guys are engaging these guys are slamming into these guys, and our heroes are shooting arrows for all they're worth at these guys. Rogi's got a heavy crossbow. Stavros has got his arcane archer. Haflet is he's a ranger with a magic bow, and Mateo, the paladin, doesn't do much of anything other than just kind of be like, I put up my shield and I wait, which is actually a really good call. And I will go into that a little bit more. So, melee goes on over here. Renita and her folks get the crap kicked out of them, and Karush starts taking his dudes towards the PCs, who are still arrowing in on the Badlands Revenge. Now, the thing about the Badlands Revenge is they're the one team that's going to fight to the death. They are not going to... they're not going to surrender. unless it's really bad shape. But generally speaking, the gnolls are not going to surrender. Period. I was going to let Jareen go. More or less, I was going to play that by ear. So they are continue. Our players are continuing to engage these guys, and these guys are continuing to move south. Now, at this point, Durin halts and he brings in his dire badger, which was actually originally supposed to be his animal companion, but I instead used Summon Nature's ally to bring him in. The reason for that was originally I had said no more than 4 on the battlefield, unless the players haven't realized yet. You guys can't react to this if you're watching it. I haven't realized that bringing in extra help doesn't violate that rule if it starts after the fight begins and you're bringing them in by magic. Okay, so it's kind of an artificial distinction, but you know, I'm the dungeon master. I can get away with this shit. Pardon. So Dire Badger starts attacking Mateo. These guys start kind of clustering up over here. They're staying together for mutual support so they can cover each other's flanks, and they can, if necessary, transition to their hand-to-hand combat weapons and form a small cluster, especially since now everybody is coming after them. So Karush and his folks are still charging. We're getting to the point now where these guys are closing and dang it, I'm selecting too many. If I recall correctly, actually one of these gnolls died and Jareen died up here. But the other 2 gnolls made it all the way to Mateo and started to engage him. And Mateo, between the dire badger and the gnolls, Mateo was really getting beaten up very badly, very quickly, and was in dire straits pretty fast. But the other players kept up the hearty storm of arrows in support, and wearing down these guys really quickly. Now Halflet at this point, when Halflet at this point, when Karush and the other members of Sapphire Squad are about there, threw a entanglement bag. And I made a rule that I decided on the spot that it entangled the horses. It didn't necessarily entangle the riders. My son is saying, "Father, take the raid." Son, I don't know what that means. How do I take the raid? I added you as a friend. My son is trying to raid me with a group, and I don't know how that works. Basically, I brought people from my stream to your stream. Oh, well, welcome all of Evan's friends. I'm explaining the small unit tactics of a Dungeons & Dragons fight right now. So the way the entanglement bag works is everybody within a 40-foot radius of the impact of the bag is entangled if they don't save versus strength. Or no, they have to make a reflex save, and if they make the reflex save, they can move it half. Otherwise, they're entangled until they make a strength check. So these guys are now, the horses are entangled. And Mateo, if I recall correctly, Mateo knocks out the badger. Boom, badger dead. And these guys have killed off the gnolls. Well, I mean, the gnolls were fairly weak, right? They only had about 37 hit points apiece. And Stavros especially was just tearing it up with his bow. He got a couple of really, really good rolls, some criticals, and it was just people dying left and right. It was beautiful to watch. So the gnolls were knocked out. So at this point, and we're only about 3 or 4 rounds into it at this point in the game. The players start focusing fire on Karush, and actually Karush was actually back here, on Karush and the other members of Sapphire Squad. They killed this one with and that was the other detail I forgot. Stavros makes the tactically sound decision to engage the horses with his bow rather than the riders. Two really good reasons for that why it makes sense. The horses have a lower armor class and a lower hit points. The horses are what give them mobility and shock effect. So you take out the horses, you immediately change the tenor of the fight. So it was a great tactical decision by Stavros to do that. So they start plunking the horses, and while they're entangled, and are able to kill off the horses. And then they start in on this guy. It gets killed. And I should note here that at this point, these guys are basically stuck trying to get out of this. This guy leaps off his horse. The boundary of the entanglement bag was about right here. So I said he could actually like run off his horse, leap off, and move forward to start to engage. And, well, they plunk him full of arrows too. At that point, sitting on top of his dead horse, his two dead teammates beside him, and the party is still on their feet. All four members. Everybody else is gone. Karush makes the decision. Mox, I've had enough. I surrender. Even though Karush probably could have gotten another good couple of combat rounds out of that. A few things I want to highlight here. One, I made tactical decisions for the enemy based on what the enemy commander of each team would have seen and what they would have thought at the time. And that's why I made that decision early on at the beginning for Karush's Sapphire Squad to attack Arcane Aruga into the flank. It was just too tempting a target not to attack. The other thing was the excellent tactical decision making by the team, by the player characters. That decision by Stavros to go after the horses, even when I had Karush kind of taunt him about it, I think I had Karush shout at him, "Ignobly done!" when he started attacking the horses, but it made sense. You take away their rapid mobility, you take away their ability to execute shock effect, you take away their ability to maneuver rapidly around, to take up those flank attacks, etc. It was just logical. Made a lot of sense, and that was definitely good decision making. Now, one thing I would criticize the party for was they had a ranger, a bowman, and a paladin. I see no magical support here, even though Stavros is an arcane archer. He didn't use any of it. He just used his bow. So if there had been an opposing magic user, they would have had no chance to leverage their own fire support in return, and could have come back to haunt them. In this case, the only strong opposing magic user, well, Arcane Aruga had arcane archers, but they got whacked in the first couple rounds. Joran here, who died far too young, he was what was he? 7th level druid, 8th level druid, 9th level druid, I think. He just got killed too quickly. I'd had a whole wild shape course of action set up for him when he closed in with the player characters. He'd wild shape into a dire crocodile, whatever it was, and start chomping, and it was going to be glorious, but it just didn't work out that way, unfortunately, for them. But no, oh my goodness, sorry about that. My phone never rings at night. Um, so it was a really great job by the players. Really happy with them. I've talked several times in these sessions about tempo and how my interpretation of tempo is that it's not about moving faster than the enemy. It's about setting the pace of events to the enemy's disadvantage. And by the player characters going invisible at the beginning of the combat, and thus not offering a target to any of the other teams originally, that really allowed them to dominate the tempo from the beginning, because everybody else reacted or acted based on a lack of information. The Karush, if he had seen the player characters, let me rephrase that. If Karush had ended up Karush and Sapphire Squad, and that's these mounted guys, had ended up anywhere on the battlefield other than really near Arcane Aruga at their flank, and had known where the player characters were at the beginning of the fight, he would have charged them instead. If Arcane Aruga had won the initiative and had seen the player characters, and Karush hadn't been where they were, Arcane Aruga would have attacked the player characters immediately, and that would have been an entirely different scenario. But because of that use of invisibility and the denial of everybody else the target of the player characters, who incidentally are competing in the arena under the name Brady Bunch. Brady Bunch. They could have come up with such a better name. Well, anyway, if they had not cast that spell, use that invisibility, and used that tempo to their advantage and dominated the tempo at the beginning, it could have gone a lot differently. And it was really just an absolute stroke of luck for them. And but they made their own luck by using it. So this was an example of where some things went really well tactically. I was really happy with the way the players did. I thought it turned out really well for them. They really used their heads and put together a good plan and executed. So again, another episode of Tactics and Tentacles wrapping up. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me on Twitter. If you have a fight of your own in an upcoming RPG, or you've got one recorded that you want me to take a look at, I will be glad to and analyze it here on the show. Thank you so much. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and we will pick this up again next Monday with the return of the ambush, in which we discuss how to do a counter ambush in a tabletop role-playing game. Thank you so much, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you a good evening. Good night.